Okay, so let's jump right into this. There's a groundbreaking study out that could completely change how we fight cancer. We're going to break down how one single genetic clue is giving us new hope. Hope for making one of the most powerful treatments out there work for so many more people. It all really starts with this huge puzzle, something that has frustrated doctors and patients for years. We've got this amazing, revolutionary type of cancer therapy, but for way too many people, it just doesn't work. The big question has always been, why? So the treatment we're talking about is called immune checkpoint blockade, or ICB for short. The best way to think about it is like this. Your immune system has these natural brakes, right? They're there to stop it from going haywire and attacking your own healthy cells. Well, some cancers are incredibly smart. They learn how to slam on those brakes, basically making themselves invisible. What ICB therapy does is it comes in and just cuts the brake lines, unleashing your immune system to finally hunt down and destroy the cancer. And even though that idea of cutting the brake lines sounds amazing, and it is, it's just not a silver bullet. And that really gets us to the heart of the problem here. This incredible promise has been met with a whole lot of frustrating reality. If you look at certain types of tumors, a good example is ovarian clear cell carcinoma. The results have been a real letdown. For some reason, releasing the brakes just wasn't enough to trigger a real attack. And that told researchers that something else had to be going on. Some other hidden factor was deciding who won and who lost. So, to figure out what that hidden factor was, scientists went digging for a new lead. And that brings us to the discovery that pretty much changed everything. Buried deep inside the complex genetic code of these tumors, they found a pattern, a surprising and incredibly important one. And wow, just look at this. The difference here is like night and day. When researchers started sifting through patient data, they saw it plain as day. Patients who had this one specific mutation in a gene called PPP2R1A had dramatically better survival rates after immunotherapy than patients who didn't. It wasn't just a small bump, it was a massive signal lighting up in all the data. Yeah, the finding was just unmistakable. The data was basically screaming at them. Like the study says, having this one single mutation was linked to way better outcomes, and not just living longer overall, but also staying cancer-free for longer. This was way more than just a coincidence. It was a powerful clue that demanded they dig deeper. So the obvious next question is, what is this mutation actually doing? I mean, how can one little gene completely flip the script and change the entire battlefield inside the body? To get that, we have to look inside the tumor itself. Okay, so this mutation basically acts like a giant distress flare. It transforms what we call a cold tumor, one that's hiding from the immune system, into a hot one that the immune system just can't ignore. First, it sounds the alarm, cranking up all these signals that scream danger to the immune system. That in turn calls in the troops. Way more of those powerful killer T cells flood the area. And finally, it actually helps build command posts right there at the tumor site, these things called tertiary lymphoid structures, where all the immune cells can get organized and launch a coordinated, powerful attack. But you know how science works, right? Seeing a pattern, even a really strong one, just isn't enough. The researchers had to prove it. They had to prove this mutation was causing the better response, not just hanging around while something else did the work. And this is where the real detective work comes in. They took what they learned from the patient data and put it to the test, rigorously, in the lab. And they didn't just use one method. They used a whole battery of them, from cells in a petri dish to really sophisticated mouse models with human-like immune systems, all to prove that if you alter this one gene, you directly make tumors more vulnerable to an immune attack. So what's the big takeaway here? This discovery gives us a totally new and, hopefully, much more reliable signpost. You see, the old ways we had of trying to predict who would benefit, things like measuring proteins on the tumor or just counting up all the genetic mistakes, they were helpful, but honestly, they were kind of hit or miss, especially in cancers like ovarian. This PP2R1A mutation seems to be a much clearer, much more direct sign that says, hey, the treatment's going to work here. Okay, but let's be real for a second. Any truly great scientific study is always honest about what it doesn't know yet. So before we get too carried away with the future, we need to talk about the important reality checks. So first off, it's really important to remember that the initial group of patients was pretty small. Also, this mutation often shows up with other ones, so figuring out its exact solo contribution is tricky. And while we know it makes tumors hot, the precise step-by-step chain reaction at the molecular level, still a bit fuzzy. This is a critical first step based on looking at past data, but now these findings absolutely need to be confirmed in future clinical trials.
And that brings us to what I think is the most exciting part of this entire story. This discovery isn't just about getting better at predicting which patients will respond. No, it's about opening up an entirely new strategy for treatment itself.
This is the big, game-changing idea. I mean, think about it. What if we didn't have to rely on a patient just being lucky enough to have this mutation naturally? What if we could find a way to artificially create that same tumor weakening effect in any patient? And that's exactly where this strategy called pharmacologic inhibition comes into play. The whole idea is that maybe, just maybe, we can develop a drug that blocks the very same pathway that the mutation disrupts. In other words, this drug would mimic the mutation's effect, turning a cold tumor hot and making it vulnerable to an immunotherapeutic attack that it would have shrugged off before. So the road ahead is actually pretty clear. The to-do list is already written. The next big steps are to launch brand new clinical trials, to prove this biomarker works in real time, to really push forward on developing and testing these new drugs that can copy the mutation, and to keep digging into the science to understand every single detail of how this whole process supercharges our immune system.
And that leaves us with this really powerful thought to chew on. This research has found a natural weak spot, a real Achilles heel in some tumors. The ultimate dream, the real goal here, is to figure out how to give every single patient's tumor that exact same vulnerability, potentially making this miracle treatment a true reality for everyone.